Okay, here's our conclusion to our story that we were talking about, Madonna and the police from chapter 15. So what happened? Here we have this 5'6", 230-pound younger brother. His paranoid schizophrenic brother, 6'4", 320 pounds, asking me if I will take them to the hospital. And I start thinking to myself, we don't do that, but what are my alternatives? Do I give them bus fare? Will they even make it safely to the hospital? Do I give them cab fare? Same thing. So I decide, okay, let's go to the parking lot. Let's get into my little Chevy S10 pickup truck, which is a 5-speed. Now, if you're not familiar with this pickup truck, it basically only fits 2 people. Very small mini truck. So I get in to the driver's seat. I weigh about 40 pounds heavier than I am now. The 5'6", 230-pound brother sits in the middle, even though there's no middle seat. The 6'4", 320-pound brother gets in the passenger side. My truck immediately becomes a lowrider. I start up the truck and I start driving it, but it's a 5-speed on the floor, and I can only shift to second gear because there's so much body in there. There's not enough room. So I'm driving low and slow, and just like a lowrider should. And right about halfway through the trip, the schizophrenic brother reaches over and cranks up my radio full blast. Now, I didn't even know my radio could go that loud, but I'm thinking to myself, okay, if that calms him down, that's beautiful. So we're driving low and slow, second gear, music blasting, a song by Madonna. I think it was Like a Virgin, so like a virgin, and music's blasting away, and up comes next to us a police car. Now, part of me is kind of freaked out. Part of me is like, oh no, um, the police are here. Are they going to take over, or is there going to be like some incident? And I can see the headlines the next day. Shootout occurs, therapist dead, everybody else okay. No, the police don't even pay us any attention. They just pass right by us. And I'm partly relieved, partly like, oh my goodness, what was that all about? So we continue driving. And did you ever notice, like, when you're really stressed, it just time slows down dramatically, right? When you're having fun, it's just like, whoosh, it's gone, right? So we finally get to the hospital. We get out of my truck. The truck pops back up. We go into the hospital. They greet this guy by name. He's been there before. They know him. Hey, so-and-so, how you doing? And I noticed somebody who works there gets on the telephone. Hey, security, we have so-and-so just arrived. The security is really smart. They come running in, but they don't have their billy clubs all out like, what's the problem? No, they come in and they blend in with the wallpaper. They're there if they're needed. They're not there to instigate a problem. Well, guess what? The schizophrenic brother decides he changed his mind, right? He's not going to go to this hospital after all. Okay, so I leave it to the hospital personnel because I'm thinking to myself, there's no way you and your brother getting back in my truck to change his mind, and he eventually changes his mind and signs himself in, right? So now you know the story of Madonna and the police. And I've given him a poor prognosis because I talked to his younger brother. I gave him a ride home, and he told me they'd been through this multiple times at different agencies, sometimes involving the police, sometimes not. And what they would do is hospitalize him, give him medication, stabilize him, and then release him, sometimes within 2 or 3 days. You know how it is with medication. Most of us don't like taking it. And if we do, it's like, sometimes it has side effects, and it's like, do I really need this? Especially if we start feeling better, right? And so he would stop taking his meds. And at 6'4", 320 pounds, was going to make him take his meds. Well, fortunately, the reason I gave him a fair and not just poor prognosis is he has his brother. His brother is still his advocate and not given up on him. So you heard the story of 4 different schizophrenics. You've met plenty more than just these 4, and so have I. But just so you know a little bit about their stories, right? How do we get it? That's the question that comes up a lot. Check your family history. A lot of times we have people in our history that we don't really know what their diagnosis is. We just hear about Uncle so-and-so who was special, or so-and-so was never the same after the war, or so-and-so was in a hospital, but we don't know exactly what was their diagnosis, right? It's important to know the diagnosis so that we know that that's part of our genetic history. It's not a guarantee that we're going to get it, but under the wrong conditions, we might. So all the more reason to take good care of ourselves. Don't let stress make you look like this after a long, hard day, right? You know what I'm talking about. Okay. So, I wanted to share this picture with you. This is what I was looking for. Somebody organized a bunch of catatonic schizophrenics. You can see this fellow's holding his shoes and so forth, all in different poses. I highly suspect that a bunch of catatonics happen to be sitting all in catatonic states next to each other. That gives you a sense that they'll hold those positions for hours and hours. Here's another picture of folks suffering from schizophrenia. The old term was dementia praecox. And I'll be honest with you, if I walked in there, I might say, "Oh, you guys work here, right? Where's, and not realize they are the patient." How likely are we going to get schizophrenia? Well, the more genetic material, for example, if your identical twin has schizophrenia, then you have a little bit less than 50% chance of also having schizophrenia. If both your parents have schizophrenia, about the same percentage, a little bit less than 50%. But as you notice, as we move further and further away from actual connectiveness when it comes to genetics, our chances of us getting help or having schizophrenia reduces substantially, right? With the general world population, about 1% affecting it. Right. Let's talk about anxiety. A lot of us have anxiety because of situations, and sometimes we have what's known as generalized anxiety disorder. And what that means is that you're anxious in multiple places. I like to think of GAT, generalized anxiety disorder, as a kind of like peanut butter. It's spread out on your flour tortilla, right? Spread out all over. So you feel it at home, you feel it at Costco, you feel it in school, you feel it watching this video. I hope I don't produce some symptoms. The good news about anxiety disorders is they're very treatable. You just have to get the help. Between psychotherapy and some medications, we can reduce anxiety disorders substantially. The bad news is not everybody wants to seek out for it. So you're having a panic attack. What does that look like? Your heart's racing, blood pressure's up. It's almost like you're getting chased by some kind of creature, right? You're down a dark alley and this creature decides he's going to get after you. That would produce all those same kind of symptoms, but you're not. You're just simply sitting here watching this video and suddenly your heart goes racing. It's a panic attack. Usually there are triggers for those. Are you afraid of something? Scarecrow from The Wizard of Oz is only afraid of one thing, a lighted match, right? Phobias are intense, irrational fears. If there is a wild pack of coyotes running towards me, it's okay to be afraid, right? That's just common sense. But there are some things that we don't need to be afraid of, but yet people are. Claustrophobia, enclosed places. Pyrophobia, fear of fire. What was the one monster that's afraid of fire? Saw him earlier. Yep, that monster can rip off your arm and beat you to death with it, but is afraid of fire. Cynophobia, fear of dogs. My sister-in-law, when she came to visit me years ago when I'm in Michigan, she would not get out of her car because I had a little dog she was afraid of. Now she owns 2 dogs. She asked me to tell you that it only took her about 30 plus years to get over her phobia, but it's possible, right? Gamophobia is one of my favorite ones, fear of marriage, right? So you can use that in case you don't want to commit if you're not committed already. In the cartoons, we talked about this earlier in the semester. In the cartoons, you get bopped in the head, you lose your memory. You get bopped again, you regain your memory. And so, guess what? That could happen. So can use of chemicals produce amnesia. So can psychological trauma. What's interesting is with a fugue state is when what I like to call amnesia with flight, where you actually lose your memory and you move and establish a new identity, maybe in a new city, a new state, maybe even a new country. You don't remember your past. And then we have dissociative identity disorder. The old name for that is multiple personality disorder. Here you have two or more distinct personalities, right? Two or more distinct personalities. Now, most of you would argue, now, wait a minute, hold on there. Two or more distinct personalities. Isn't that describing the professor, right? Yeah, sort of, but no. These are so distinct that goes by different names. Well, still applies. They have different personalities. Still applies. They're not necessarily aware of the other one's behaviors. There we get into the difference. Is it possible to fake some of these dissociative disorders? Of course it is, right? People who are trying to avoid criminal action sometimes will fake these disorders, right? So there's a lot of disorders that play into the possibilities of our life. What can we do about them? Well, the good thing about these chapters is when we talk about therapy, that's one of my favorite chapters too. As a matter of fact, last couple of chapters are my favorites of all time because we get into the realm of what can we do about situations that occur to us. So we don't have to walk around and scream all the time, right? Scream in pain and agony. There is hope, but a lot depends on how good we take care of ourselves. We have to eat right. We have to reduce our stress. We have to meditate. We have to do some cardio exercise, whatever works for folks, right? So that when we're faced with those stressors, right, when those things start coming at us, we're not overwhelmed. We can handle it, but we got to be prepared. So speaking of being prepared, let me give you the answers to this particular chapter. Ooh, I'm glad you tuned into all three of these videos because I've got a question on Mrs. Talk-A-Lot. Tell me everything you can about that story. I've got a question about Freddy the Catatonic. I want diagnosis. I want prognosis. Same thing with the ticker. Same thing with Rancho Grande. Same thing with Madonna and the Police. I want you to be able to discuss all of these case studies from my personal experience and support it with factual data. And it's okay to use textbook and other sources to support it with factual data. I appreciate your attention. Can't wait for Chapter 16.